It is an honor to be here tonight, and I really appreciate the opportunity to come back and to be able to give this information today and tomorrow and also Sunday. And if you are visiting with us, we are so glad that you chose to be here. There are many other places that you could have chosen to be on a Friday night, good weather and such like, but you chose to be here, and I really appreciate that. I want to maybe give a little information right before we begin, because in your mind you may say, why should I be coming and thinking about a subject that I don't really want to talk about, and do so with a fellow that I've never even seen before, much less know much about? Well, that's really a good question. And as a minister for 30 years full time, that's sort of where all this got started. It was in 1985 that I was at a Bible lectureship in Florence, Alabama, then called International Bible College, now called Heritage Christian University. And there was a fellow by the name of Bill McDonald, who was an elder, a funeral home director, and he also was a grief counselor. And he was speaking on the subject, preachers and grief. And so I went to this class thinking I'd learn something about that, because always there's so much more you need to learn. And one of the first things he said, Brent, really got my attention. He said, preachers are the second worst equipped group of people to deal with grief. Well, needless to say, I thought, what is he talking about? And so after the class, which was a very good class, I went up to him and I said, hey, what did you mean by that statement? He said, well, tell me what you do as a minister when someone in your congregation dies. I said, well, I go to be with them. Wonderful. What do you do after that? I said, well, I go to the funeral home visitation. Great. What do you do after that? I said, well, I go to the funeral. Great. What do you do after that? And I sort of paused and thought, well, and he said, that's what I'm talking about. We largely think in our minds that we've checked the things off that we need to do, but we leave those people alone, maybe still in shock, certainly numbness, and going through the grief journey without their minister, and in some cases their church, with them. I had to admit that I was guilty as charged. He recommended a couple of books. I began to do some research along the line of that. My brother was down in L.A., Lower Alabama, Evergreen, and he said, hey, we're starting a grief support class. That was 1992. And so he sent me the information, and I was in Guin, Alabama, Northwest Alabama. And so we began teaching a grief support class, and that's been going on now for the last 30 years, 10 weeks. Wherever I am, and we teach that class. And during that time, I was also a hospice chaplain, and then went to the University of Alabama to get a certificate of completion in thanatology, fancy word for the study of death. But through that, began to do research, began to do workshops. My brother and I together have done about 100 of these in, I think, 13 states. We were in Benton, Kentucky last weekend. But having said all that, I may learn a whole lot more from you than you will ever learn from me this weekend. But my hope is that there's something that can be said, or through the information that will be handed out that you already have in front of you, that perhaps will be helpful. I would welcome any comments or any questions. You may have to talk a little louder since we're in a big room like this, but that would certainly be appropriate. And we're going to start by looking at 13 things I wish I could tell people about my grief. And so that's where we are. But first of all, I want to read you this statement by Terry Kettering. There's an elephant in the room. It's large and squatting, so it's hard to get around it. Yet we squeeze by with, how are you? And I'm fine. And 1,000 other forms of trivial chatter. We talk about work. We talk about the weather. We talk about everything else except the elephant in the room. There is an elephant in the room. We all know it's there. We're thinking about it as we talk. It's constantly on our minds. For you see, it's a very big elephant. But we don't talk about the elephant in the room. Oh, please say her name. Oh, please say Barbara again. Oh, please let's talk about the elephant in the room. For if we talk about her death, perhaps we can also talk about her life. Can I say, Barbara, and have you not look away? For if I cannot, you're leaving me alone in a room with an elephant. Sometimes it's really hard to find those folks who are willing and desirous of talking and thinking about our grief. But the fact of the matter is, it's a part of life. A very simple definition for grief is this: love plus loss equals grief. As we'll look at that tomorrow, there's a lot of other things in life besides the death of a physical human being that we do grieve about. And so if I love someone and then I lose someone or something, health, whatever, there's going to be grief. And so in this huge crowd tonight, wow, what a great crowd. We're in a room where we're all thinking about the same thing. And let's begin by looking at some things that we wish others could know about our grief. Number one, I wish you would not be afraid to speak my loved one's name. They lived and were important. I need to hear their name. Question: what's in a name? What's the importance or value of a name? Identification. Exactly right. What else?
Represents that person.
Represents that person. Maybe a name that was specially given to them, a continuation of a family, Charles II, Charles III, whatever the case may be. Everybody has a name. It's really important that in most cases, even in the grief journey, most people will still not feel anything but gratitude for you if you choose to talk about their loved one and call them by name. Maybe a story. I remember Miss Gladys when she used to cook, whatever the story may be. There's something about a name, and it's so very important. And if it's too hard, then people who are grieving will let you know, hey, right now, that's just a little too tough. But in most cases, there's value in that name. A couple of months ago, I did a grief workshop over in Talladega, Alabama. And a lady during the break, and please feel free to come up and talk with me before, after we're finished tonight, whatever the case may be, tomorrow, I'll be more than glad to listen to the story that you have, whatever the case may be, questions you might have. But this lady came to us during the break, and she said, my husband died of a heart attack right in front of me. There was nothing I could do. It was instant, and he died. We called 911. The paramedics came and did everything they could do, and they could not bring him back. And so in time, the funeral home was called. And she said, and when I say this, if you're a part of the funeral home, I mean this in no negative way towards you. I'm just simply telling you her story. But she said that they came and that they put a sheet over him, and then they put them in something. And as they were about to leave, one of the men looked at her and said, we're about to take him away. And it just hit her. And she said, Don, I said to him, his name is Herman. And she was thinking already they were forgetting to use him by name, and that was offensive to her, especially at that critical, unexpected time. There's something in a name. Number two, when I cry, or if I cry and get emotional when we talk about my loved one, I wish you would know it's not because you've hurt me. The fact that my loved one died has caused my tears. You've allowed me to cry, and I thank you. Crying in emotional outbursts are normal. Some people don't have the capacity to cry. Tear ducts don't work like that. Others can cry at the drop of a hat, as the saying goes. It's okay. What we're looking for are people who are willing to allow us to cry in their presence. You know, Romans chapter 12, verse 15 still says, rejoice with them that do rejoice. And then did you notice that next word? And. Not or. And. In other words, just as important as rejoicing with folks when good things happen, also equally important is to weep with them that weep. We'll look Sunday at the story of Jesus and Mary and Martha and Lazarus. And it's interesting to look at the story there in regards to those that were there and that were weeping along with the family over the death of a brother. And so a person may show emotion, but that says something about the love that they have. At the same time, simply because a person does not show emotion does not mean that they did not care. We need to make sure that we don't suggest that either, because in some cases, they may not know exactly how much emotion to show you because they may not know you as well, or because sometimes people don't handle people's emotions as well as possible. We did a workshop up in Delaware, and an elder of the church had lost a child, and someone came to him and said, your grief suffocates me. Well, that's sad, isn't it? And the end result was that they pulled back from caring for that family as they needed to. We all have stories like that we could tell. But the point is that the love that we have and the loss that we have is going to cause the grief. And in some cases, that means tears or things of that nature. Number 3, I wish you wouldn't kill my loved one again by removing from your home pictures, remembrances, etc. They are still a part of our lives. Some people may mean well when they may take pictures out of a home because a loved one has died and family members are coming. But one of the best things that can be done is simply to ask the question, hey, is it okay for us to continue to have remembrances of your husband, pictures, because you're going to be coming to our home from afar? We don't want to hurt anybody in any way, but we'd love to sit there and talk about that loved one. I think that's certainly appropriate. At holidays especially, that is really, really important to be able to put those out. And one of the chapters in the book, Walking with Those Who Weep, over here that my brother and I wrote, is on grief in the holidays. And one of the most natural ways of getting people to talk about your loved one is to put out remembrances during the holiday season, maybe pictures or maybe picture albums, and have those there. And as they're walking by, they'll say, you know, that picture of him catching that fish, what you don't know about that story is he almost fell out of the boat before he caught it. And it took him 2 hours to carry that in, and we had to keep on throwing water on him because he was getting so hot. But he pulled that fish in, and then what do? People just begin to talk naturally. And just a picture brought out that idea. And so sometimes it's really helpful that we continue to do that. And in some cases, it can be offensive to others. I know a situation where a wife had died. The funeral was on a Friday. And when the family had all come back, the brothers and sisters, the sons and the daughters, I should say, had all come back to the home, the daddy said, now, girls, tomorrow, I want you to go in your mother's room and take everything out. I don't want anything there. That was sad because those were remembrances. And on one hand, I understand his pain, but on the other hand, there were so many other components of that. And that was really hurtful to those families. They didn't even have the opportunity to take special things. He gave them to folks outside the family. And so that can really, really be hard. Number 4, I will have emotional ups and downs, highs and lows. I wish you wouldn't think that if I have a good day, my grief's all over, and if I had a bad day, I need psychiatric counseling. There's sometimes people who have that concept. What's the number one question that people will ask grieving people when they're nearby you? 4 words. How are you doing? What's the number one answer that typically grieving people give them? 2 words. I'm fine. Why is that? Why do we say I'm fine? Don't want to talk about it?
Because I really don't want to know.
You might think that they don't really want to know. They don't know how to talk about it. I'm sorry. Okay. So all of that adds up into that idea that if a person is doing good and they happen to have a big smile on their face and they look good, you're thinking, oh, they're over that by now. Grief is never something that you get over. You can't go around it. You can't go under it. You got to go through it and hopefully grow through it. But for us to understand that just because a person looks like they're having a great day, let's be thankful they're having a great day, because there are other times, and what may often be the case is that you didn't see them 2 hours ago when they cried all their makeup off, if it was a lady, or they were, hitting something because of the great feelings that they were feeling because of the sadness they were with. And so sometimes people see us in our better times, and just because we're looking better doesn't mean necessarily we are better. I had a good friend she was our class. Her husband had been killed in a motorcycle accident going back to TVA up in Georgia, and had an accident and died. And she told the story that on a Wednesday night at Florence Boulevard Church of Christ, where I serve as a deacon, a man came up to her, took her by the hand, and said, "How are you really doing?" And she said, "I lost it. I just screamed in his face and ran out as fast as I could." As I ran out in the parking lot, I thought to myself, he really does want to know. And so she said, I got myself back together, went back in, and then I told him just how tough it was to be a widow, a young widow, to be taking care of younger children, and not to have the love of her life a part of that experience. But at least she says, I was grateful that he really did want to know. Number 5, being a bereaved person is not contagious, so I wish you would not shy away from me. C.S. Lewis, in the book, a very thin but wonderful book, A Grief Observed, made the statement because he himself, in the movie Shadowlands, I think came out in 1993, Deborah Winger was the married person to the actor of C.S. Lewis. But he married late in life and was so happy, and then she died in a couple of years with a terrible disease. And he made the comment in that book, A Grief Observed, that perhaps grieving people just ought to be put in a leper colony, because sometimes people feel like that they don't know what to do with them. Well, that's sad. I hope that's really not the way it should be. But in some cases, a person may feel that way. And so we need to be careful that we not shy away from folks who are grieving. Number 6, I wish you knew that all the crazy grief reactions I'm having are in fact very normal. Depression, anger, frustration, etc., are to be expected following the death of a loved one. In some of your notes, I believe you will find it's called A Ball of Emotions. Flip back to that if you don't mind. Or is tonight just tonight's notes? Just tonight's notes. I'm sorry. You got to come back tomorrow and get that one. But there's nothing neat about grief. Kubler-Ross in 1969 came up with 5 steps, but she never meant for that to be the main of the grief journey. And she said, I never meant for people to think that all you got to do is those 5 and that's it. That's not it at all. And so when I'm talking about grief, I don't talk about stages. You know, if there was a stage behind me, I'd have to go 3 steps to get into it. Well, phase is a whole lot better because you can be back and forth in a lot of different grief reactions all at the same time. You can go back and forth in those. And so there's nothing neat about it. And so the point here is well taken that going back and forth is normal, and those things and much more that we'll be looking at tomorrow sort of deals with that. Number 7, I wish you wouldn't expect my grief to be over in 6 months. The first few years are going to be exceedingly traumatic for me. As with an alcoholic, I will never be cured or a former bereaved person, but will forevermore be a recovering bereaved person. Henry Nouwen came up with a good title, which I think is pretty true for grieving people. You are a wounded healer. Now think about that. You carry the wounds, but hopefully you're in the process of healing by what you are doing, by being a part of a class like this, by reading books that can help you, by being a part of a support group. You can be a wounded healer, but it's not just going to go away, and there is no time frame in that manner. Another person more recently said that grieving people are creative survivors. Now, I like that one for 2 reasons. Because surviving means that you're trying to make it. Whatever is left, you're trying to make the best of it. And creative means that you have to work at it. You know, you have to do something to get to that point. Any other questions or thoughts before we continue on? Number 8, I wish you would understand the physical reactions to grief. I may gain weight or lose weight, sleep all the time or not at all, develop a host of illnesses and be accident prone, all of which are related to my grief. I've done studies concerning widows and widowers dealing with the loss of their mate, that mate that they said that they would be with forever until death do us part. Here's what they found. For widowers that are dealing with the loss of their wife, they are more susceptible to illness in the first year following the death of their mate than before. Grief has a way of lowering your immune system. And so the end result is that sometimes because of the grief, because of trying to get things back as best you can and work with what you've got, sometimes they have found that widowers are more susceptible to illnesses in the first year following the death of their mate. Interestingly enough, the same study found out that with widows, it's more the 2nd to 3rd year following the death of their mate, that their immune system may be lower, that they are more susceptible to health issues. And so grief does really do a great number on us. And we need to understand that it does affect us physically, mentally, socially, spiritually, and so many other ways. Number 9, my loved one's birthday, the anniversary of their death, and holidays are terrible times for me. I wish you would tell me that you are thinking about my loved one on those days, and if I get quiet and withdrawn, just know I'm thinking about them too, so don't try to coerce me into being cheerful. Holidays are tough times. They're a reminder that what was once wonderful and beautiful and festive has changed, and it's a whole lot different than it was. And so we just have to understand that with people. If we want to minister to folks, then let's remember the anniversary of that loss. As when I was a full-time minister, I would try at least the first 3 years following the death of their loved one to write them a letter on the week of their anniversary, letting them know that this was the first year that Brother George was no longer with this good woman, and we have so many good memories of him, and I'll be praying for you this week. That's so important. Holidays. Sometimes people say, should I invite them or not invite them? Do it this way. Invite them to come to a gathering that you're going to have, but give them an out. Say, listen, if you can only stay 1 hour, that's great. I'll even park you in a place where you can get out. And if by chance at the very last moment you just can't come, fine. But at least they'll be appreciative that you thought enough, even in the midst of their sorrow, to invite them to come and be a part of that situation. We had some folks that would know that this good woman, it was just her and her husband, and he had died, and every Valentine's he would buy her a dozen roses. So when that first year came along, they sent the roses to her. Just a way to say, we love you, we're thinking about you, and you're not suffering alone. You see, grieving people are not going to forget their loved ones. They're afraid that you or I will forget. And so it's really important that we not do that. Number 10, it's normal that most of us examine our faiths, values, and beliefs after losing loved ones. Death causes us to ask questions and search for answers. I wish you would pray for me and walk with me in my journey. That's so important for us to be able to be there with people. Sometimes we've had sessions 45 minutes in length just talking about what do you do and what do you say and what do you not say. And I know a lot of times people will ask the question, I go to the funeral home or I see them in the hallway or in the vestibule or in the foyer and I just don't know what to say. One of the best things I ever remember someone saying was a lady that was a part of our grief class, and she said, I go to the funeral home, they're often standing there beside the casket of their beloved, and I will look at the family and I will say, I don't know how you feel, but can I give you a hug? Nobody's going to take exception to that, because that says basically two things. First of all, you truly don't know how they feel, because we don't. And secondly, we still care. And that's really important to determine in people. It's not the words, it's the actions. And Sunday afternoon in our closing service, I'm going to give you a list of 28 things that people in the throes of grief said, here were the things that were done in the first few hours, the first few days, the first few weeks that really helped me in my grief journey. And so we'll try to talk about some of those things that will be helpful. But it's important that we keep that in mind. Number 11, I wish you would not offer me anything to ease the pain. They're just temporary crutches. The only way I can get through the grief is to experience it. Prescription medication may be necessary, but I will hurt before I heal. I'm not a doctor. I don't have the ability to know what a person needs or does not need. That's entirely up to a doctor. And so if a person needs to take prescription medicine because of the grief that they're dealing with, so be it. That's on them, and that's the doctor that determines that. However, it's important that we allow them to grieve in their way, and that we try to help them in that situation the very best way that we can. Number 12, I wish you would understand that grief changes people. I'm not the same person I was the moment before my loved one died, and I'll never be that person again. If you keep waiting for me to get back to my old self, you'll be frustrated. I'm a new creature with new thoughts, dreams, and aspirations. Please try to get to know the new me. Maybe you will still like me. We talk about BD versus AD, before the death versus after the death. It changes us. Whether it's a child, whether it's a mate, whether it's a sibling, even whether it's a grandparent, whatever the case may be. Somebody might ask the question, in this crowd of 85 to 100 people, we'll just say 200, right? We'll just say 200. Preachers count. What is the greatest loss? In the grief journey, what is the greatest loss? You know what the answer is? The greatest loss is yours. Whatever that loss or losses are, that's the greatest loss because it's yours. It's what you're owning. It's what is a part of you. It's what stays with you throughout the day. Any books that you read, they may talk about some having perhaps maybe more emotions than others, but not necessarily. And so the greatest loss is yours, whatever it or whatever they are. And in some cases, I can only imagine that there are several losses that some of you are dealing with. It's called cumulative grief, in which you're trying to deal with this loss, say the loss of a grandparent, and 3 months into that grief journey, you have another sudden unanticipated loss, which is what we're going to be talking about the next session. And so you're trying to deal with that one, and then all of a sudden you get fired from work or they retire you early. And so you got all these griefs, and they're different, but they're all causing sadness. They're all causing situations in your life, and you can't deal with one because here's another one, and then here goes another one. I had a lady in our class who in 9 months lost a child to death, lost a husband through divorce, and then lost her job. She couldn't deal with one wound before she was having to deal with the other one, and rightly so. And so we have to understand that grief is going to change people. It may affect them physically. It certainly is going to affect them socially, and we need to be able to be there with people wherever they are. Then number 13, stay the course with me. I need you now and later as well. I don't need you to feel like you have to fix this. I just need you to listen. I wish you would not see me as an assignment and then check out after some visits. Somebody told me recently about a minister whose way of visiting with people was to go to the hospital, go to their door. How you doing, buddy? Things getting better? That's great. I hope things get better for you. And then just move on. How long did that take? 15 seconds? Maybe in his mind, he could check that off his list. I've seen so-and-so, now I'll go to the next room. That's not what people need. We'll look at this later on, but tonight for your homework, if you want some homework, go to the book of Job and read verses 11 through 13 about those 3 friends of Job, and when they came upon him with all the tragedy that he had, tragedies, I should say, that he had, look at what they did. Because you can't do much better than what they did. In fact, it's really only when they open their mouth the problems begin, right, Brent? But they did the right thing for that period of time, becoming like him, not trying to change him, sitting in the midst of his pain. And that's what people need. Any questions or any comments? We're about to take a break, but wanted to see if there's anything you would like to say before we come back and do our final session. My promise is to get you out of here by 8 o'clock, because I know you have places to go.